Okay, so you've all been prepped. I'm going to tell you the story of how Beech Nut came to be. And it's actually the story of how a whole bunch of cultural forces that were in play at the beginning of the 20th century all coalesced on this hill in Rockport, Maine. And believe it or not, the first force in our story is the Industrial Revolution. And the Industrial Revolution created great wealth. And our character actor representing industrial wealth is John Grabel of Philadelphia, who was the son of a mining equipment manufacturer, and he rose through business to become a public utilities tycoon. So by the time he was in his 50s in the 19-teens, he had the money to do pretty much whatever he pleased. But hand in hand with the Industrial Revolution rose a counter-revolution. I'm sure there's a lot of counter-revolutionaries in this room. Counter-revolution, and that was the arts and crafts movement. And the arts and crafts movement was the intellectual counterpoint to the Industrial Revolution. It was a nostalgia for the craftsmanship being lost to the machine age, and for the rural life which these intellectuals idealized that was being lost as people migrated to cities to work in factories. And John Grabel, although he was an industrialist, was so enamored with the ideals of the arts and crafts movement that he designed his Philadelphia house to mimic Kelmscott House, which is the country manor of the founder of the arts and crafts movement, William Morris. So we know John Grabel was completely on board with these ideals, though he was selling gas in Philadelphia. So then enter disease, another force in the beginning of the 20th century. Our cities were not healthy places to be in the summer. There was overcrowding, there was poor sanitation. You mix that with heat, and it was a recipe for contagious diseases. And anybody who could afford to would get their families out of town and into the country for the summer. And a favorite place to come was Maine, with its cool air and sea breezes. And so these combined forces of the arts and crafts movement, which celebrated rural living, the wealth created by industry, and this imperative of getting out of the city because of disease, were what brought many people, including John Grabel, to summer in Maine, and they built an estate which, if it wasn't foggy, you could see, called Weather End, out at the end of Rockport Harbor. Meanwhile, across the sea that you cannot see in Norway, a young landscape designer was engaging in another favorite 20th century activity, speculation. And it did not work out so well for him. He lost all his money in a shipping venture, and so 1909 saw Hans Heisted passing through Ellis Island, along with countless others, looking to find a new home in the land of opportunity. And of course, he landed in New York, and there, with his landscape architecture background, he encountered another force at the beginning of the 20th century, the landscape architecture ideas of Frederick Law Olmsted. And Olmsted's gift to landscape architecture was this philosophy that he called the genius of place. And what he meant by the genius of place was the special qualities that any corner of nature has. And what he believed is that any design that you impose on nature should not feel like an imposition. It should enhance and complement the beauty of nature rather than calling attention to itself. So Heisted encountered these ideas in New York, and then there are a bunch of wealthy rusticators in Maine carving their rural paradises out of the wilderness, and they always need professional help. I know, I do that still. So Heisted went to work for Olmsted's firm, which was then run by his sons, and he was shipped up to Bar Harbor to do the design for the Pulitzer estate. And he fell in love with Maine. It was like his native Norway, and he said, "This is where I want to settle." So by the end of 1910, he had settled in the Camden Rockport area and was beginning to pick up clients among the summer residents, and one of them was John Grabel. This is how it all comes together. And Grabel wanted him to improve the grounds of Weather End out there in the fog. And Heisted's idea for how to improve Weather End, which was just rocky ledges out by the sea, was to create outdoor rooms, which involved a lot of stone walls and stone terraces. And a whole crew of masons was hired to do this work. And then winter was coming, and the weather at Weather End was getting worse and worse. And John Grabel got concerned that he was going to lose his crew because of the nasty weather, and he needed to think of a project for his masons that would keep them busy over the winter and out of the freezing ocean spray that had started to wash over Dead Man's Point. And he had the perfect idea. Why not build a lodge on top of Beech Hill? Because it may be cold, but at least it's not wet. So Heisted was hired to come up with the design for this place, and he used Olmstedian principles to do it. Your experience, as many of you experienced today, was to start at the entry gate, which is now collapsed, but it was once exquisite. And you can't see your destination or the views from there, but the quality of the gate hinted at something magical beyond. And the road itself spirals up the hill, and if you had been able to see it today, views are revealed very slowly to you. First, you get a hint of Chickawaukee. Then you curve around and see a little bit of the bay, and then the whole bay is revealed, including Weather End, the estate. And finally, this house itself, which feels like it just rises up out of the earth, made of the very materials of the landscape. And this building itself is a complete mongrelization that could only happen in America. The form of this building is classic Norwegian mountain lodge, this big open living space and the covered porch, the sod roof. But in Norway, a building like this would be built log cabin style for warmth. I mean, it'd be crazy to have a stone house in Norway. You couldn't keep it warm. But the whole point of this project was to keep masons busy, so it was built of stone. Anything that could be. They couldn't figure out the roof, but everything else was made of stone. And then other strange things happened. This fireplace behind me is classic American in the gable end of the living room, where in Norway it would have been off in the corner. And then this whole craftsman-like quality to the place, including these windows with the itty-bitty panes and the doors with the diamond panel, are all in keeping with John Grabel's ideals of the arts and crafts movement and the sense of a craftsman's hands on every surface. And no one would ever lived here. This was a folly. It was a rich man's folly. It was a fantasy place. It was a destination. It was an experience. The Grabels and their guests would start off down at Weather End, and they'd pile into carriages with their children and their dogs and their servants and their picnic baskets, and everyone would be trussed up in their Sunday best, and then they'd roll through town and roll through country and up this spiral road to be here and have a picnic and sip tea, maybe something a little stronger, maybe have pie, and just experience something out of the ordinary, something completely different than their oceanside home. And isn't that why we still come here? I mean, the carriages have been replaced by cars. The clothing is a lot more comfortable. The servants are nowhere to be found. But we still come for that experience and pie. And the very fact that this building is still much as it was, and the landscape is still much as it was 100 years ago, is really thanks to the Coastal Mountains Land Trust. But of course, that's its own story. So thank you very much.